There was once a time at the University of Lagos when the peaceful rhythm of academic life was interrupted by a growing tension between two powerful student groups. One of the most significant power struggles in the school's history began quietly, almost unnoticed, until it erupted into a series of clashes that would reshape the very atmosphere of the campus. This is the untold story of how the Airlord group, once seen as the unchallenged force within the university, faced a rising opposition from another group known for its expanding influence across many schools, the Black Axe. What started as a quiet competition for influence soon escalated into what many described as a territorial dispute. At the heart of it was a deep-rooted desire for control, recognition, and authority over student life on campus. What followed was a wave of tension that disrupted normalcy and gave birth to a new order, which many still refer to today as power changing hands. According to various accounts passed down by students over the years, the Airlord confraternity had long planted its roots at the University of Lagos. In fact, oral narratives suggest that they were the first group to establish a firm structure within the institution. Over time, they built a strong internal system that extended across different parts of student society, from faculty associations to the student union, and even into the private hostels located off campus. Their presence was anything but subtle. Their members were said to be everywhere, quietly but strategically placed in key positions of student leadership and influence. The group operated with a sense of coordination and reach that gave them a near monopoly over student power. As older members completed their studies and left the university, newer students were brought in, carefully selected and introduced into their fold. This steady cycle ensured that the group remained strong and relevant year after year. For a long time, their influence was unmatched. But things began to shift when the Black Axe, another known confraternity from other institutions, started gaining momentum within the university. Their arrival wasn't entirely surprising, especially to those who understood the changing social dynamics among students. But what caught many off guard was how quickly they began to build their numbers and attract attention. The Black Axe came with a message that resonated with a segment of the student population. Their ideology, which emphasized freedom, personal strength, and rebellion against control, appealed to many young minds looking for a sense of belonging and identity. Within a short period, they began recruiting members, smartly targeting students who felt overlooked or wanted something different from the norm. Their growth wasn't just about numbers, it was about visibility. Soon, signs of their presence began to appear across the university, in classrooms, around the hostels, and especially in off-campus lodges. Their rising influence was no longer something that could be ignored. The once undisputed Airlords were now faced with a new and determined rival, one that seemed ready to rewrite the rules and disrupt the balance of power that had existed for years. What followed this silent build-up was a gradual but tense confrontation between both groups. While there was no official declaration of conflict, those close to the student body began to feel the pressure. Whispers of meetings, disappearances, and silent warnings moved through the student community like wildfire. The institution that once prided itself on academic excellence now found itself struggling to maintain peace and safety. Though many students continued with their studies, a sense of unease lingered in the air. Nobody could predict what would happen next, but it was clear that the University of Lagos was no longer the same. It had become a stage for a quiet but dangerous struggle for dominance, with students caught in the middle, some knowingly, others completely unaware. This story is not just about conflict. It is about how the desire for influence, recognition, and identity among young people can shape the environment they live in. It's about how campus life, meant to nurture learning and growth, can be affected by underground movements seeking power and respect. And most of all, it's a story of how easily peace can give way to tension when competition goes unchecked. As the Black Axe group continued to grow in numbers and confidence within the University of Lagos, it became clear to them that their rising presence would eventually bring them into direct conflict with the already established Airlords. They understood the reality ahead of them. One day, they would have to confront the group that had long held sway over the university's power structure. That day wasn't certain, but it was coming. And when it arrived, they intended to be ready. The problem was not just about ideology or popularity, it was about space, influence, and dominance. The university, for all its size, had limited space, socially, politically, and physically. There wasn't enough room for two growing power blocks to operate side by side without stepping on each other's toes. As both groups increased in numbers, the once clear lines between their zones of control began to blur. Hostels, both on campus and in the nearby off-campus areas, became zones of silent competition. It wasn't unusual to find members of both groups living just a few doors away from each other. They shared the same lecture halls, attended the same departmental events, and even walked the same paths across campus. But beyond these surface-level similarities, there was a quiet but brewing contest for dominance. Even the student union government, once seen as a neutral body for student welfare and leadership, became another arena of interest. Both the Air Lords and the Black Axe began to push their influence into student politics, supporting candidates and lobbying behind closed doors. What used to be simple elections began to feel like calculated moves in a much larger game. For the Air Lords, who had long enjoyed the upper hand, this new competition was unsettling. For years, they had operated with minimal resistance. Their influence ran deep, and their system was well structured. But now, they were being forced to adjust, to rethink, and to act. The growing strength of the Black Axe posed a serious challenge, and the Air Lords began to feel that if they didn't act early, they might lose control altogether. The tension reached a new level when the Air Lords reportedly spotted a newly admitted student, allegedly affiliated with the Black Axe, working alone in a faculty where many of the Air Lords were known to dominate. According to circulating campus whispers, the student was surrounded and physically assaulted. While the incident may have seemed isolated on the surface, those who understood the underlying currents knew that it was much more than that. It was a signal. A warning. The Black Axe did not take the incident lightly. In what appeared to be a swift response, one of the suspected Air Lord members was confronted late at night while returning to campus. The details of the incident were murky, but the message was loud and clear: retaliation had begun. What had once been a silent tension was now beginning to take a more aggressive turn. These two back-to-back confrontations marked the official beginning of what many would later call the campus rivalry era. There were no public announcements, no official statements. But those who walked the halls, shared the lecture rooms, and lived in the hostels knew that the mood had changed. An invisible line had been crossed. And though it hadn't yet exploded into full-scale chaos, everyone could feel something serious was looming. The atmosphere on campus grew heavier. Conversations became more hushed. Students avoided staying out late or moving through certain paths, especially after dark. The feeling of safety that once defined the school environment had quietly faded. Everyone now moved with extra caution, unsure of what might come next. Then came another incident, this time at a quiet, poorly lit area off campus, far from the crowded lecture halls and hostels. It was here that another suspected member of the Black Axe was reportedly attacked. Details were scarce, as always, but the story spread quickly. Fear traveled faster than facts, and in a matter of days, the student body was on edge. There was still no official confrontation between the two groups. No large-scale showdown. But what had started as silent competition had now turned into a series of warnings, counter-warnings, and targeted actions. Each group was watching the other closely, waiting, planning, and preparing for what many believed was now inevitable. The University of Lagos, once known solely for academic excellence and vibrant student life, had quietly become a breeding ground for rivalry between two determined forces. And as the days passed, it became clear to all, this was no longer just a struggle for influence. It was a calculated battle for control. And the worst was yet to come. It was clear to everyone on campus that something serious was brewing. The once energetic environment of the University of Lagos had begun to change. A shadow had fallen over daily life, and the air was thick with unease. Students who were once carefree and vibrant suddenly became cautious and reserved. They avoided unnecessary movements, especially once the sun began to set. Paths that were once full of laughter and light conversations now echoed with silence. The feeling of safety had disappeared, replaced by uncertainty and fear. Within a matter of weeks, the tension that had been quietly building between the two dominant confraternities, the Air Lords and the Black Axe, finally reached a boiling point. What began as quiet confrontations and scattered acts of warning soon escalated into a full-blown conflict that shook the entire institution to its core. The Black Axe confraternity, determined to prove that they were not just growing in number but in strength, launched a series of carefully coordinated actions aimed at sending a strong message. Their goal was clear: to shake the foundation of the Lord's confidence and to force a shift in the balance of power. These weren't just random acts, they were calculated moves designed to challenge the status quo and make their presence impossible to ignore. The Lords, known for their pride in being the long-standing dominant force, could not stand idly by. Their identity, reputation, and influence were at stake. They responded swiftly and forcefully. For them, it wasn't just about holding ground, it was about defending their legacy. They saw the attacks as a direct insult to everything they had built over the years, and they were determined to show that they would not be pushed aside. As the conflict intensified, it became clear that this was unlike anything the university had seen before. What had started as subtle power play had transformed into a dangerous and chaotic struggle for dominance. And in the midst of it all were the students, many of whom had no ties to either group, caught in the crossfire of fear and confusion. The effects of the clash were immediate and far-reaching. Some members from both sides, especially those who had joined with little understanding of the risks, began to rethink their choices. The reality of what they were involved in began to sink in. This was no longer about status or group pride, it was about survival. Several students, fearing for their lives, quietly withdrew from the university. Some left without even packing their full belongings, choosing instead to disappear in the middle of the night. To them, safety was more important than any affiliation. As more incidents occurred, more people went into hiding. Students who were once loud and bold became ghost-like, moving quickly and quietly, avoiding eye contact, and refusing to discuss anything openly. Whispers of betrayal began to circulate. Within both confraternities, suspicions grew. Fingers were pointed. Trust began to crack. Allegations of disloyalty and information leaks led to internal friction, and soon, both groups began expelling members they suspected of being traitors. In some cases, long-time friendships dissolved overnight. The university authorities found themselves overwhelmed. Despite growing awareness of what was going on, they struggled to pinpoint who was truly responsible for the violence. No one would speak openly. The fear of being associated with any of the events kept most students silent, even when they knew something. As a result, direct evidence was hard to come by, and the school's ability to take disciplinary action was limited. Faced with mounting pressure and an increasingly dangerous environment, the university leadership had no choice but to call for external help. Law enforcement agencies were invited to step in, and they did so swiftly. Several student gatherings, especially those suspected to be under observation, were raided. Events were cancelled. Meetings were banned. Social life on campus changed dramatically. Several arrests were made, and many students were taken in for questioning. The human cost of the conflict was high, though not publicly acknowledged. The university, eager to maintain its reputation and prevent panic, did not release the names of students who were affected. But those who were on campus during that period knew the truth. They saw the empty seats in lecture halls. They noticed the sudden absence of familiar faces. They knew which rooms in the hostels had been quietly vacated and which names were no longer whispered in the hallways. This was more than just a rivalry between two student groups, it was a wound to the university itself. It was a moment in time when the peace and stability of academic life were shaken by a struggle for power. And though the events may not have made headlines or been printed in official university records, those who lived through it would never forget. The scars remained, not just on the physical structures of the school but in the memories of every student who walked its grounds during that dark chapter. What was once a place of learning had, for a time, become a battleground. And as with all battles, the effects would be felt long after the final blow was struck. In the aftermath of the fierce and unforgettable conflict, the campus slowly began to return to a state of uneasy calm. The dust had settled, but the memories remained fresh in the minds of everyone who witnessed what had happened. The University of Lagos had never experienced anything like it before, and even though life appeared to move on, nothing truly went back to the way it once was. According to several unverified but widely circulated reports, the Lords were able to reassert themselves in the months that followed the crisis. Many believe that despite suffering heavy losses, they managed to regain control over much of their former strongholds across the university. Their ability to bounce back was seen by some as a reflection of their deeply rooted presence within the institution, one built over many years through networks, tradition, and silent influence. The Black Axe, on the other hand, reportedly took a more subdued approach in the wake of the chaos. While they didn't vanish from campus life, their public activities significantly reduced. Members became less visible, more discreet, and more cautious in their interactions. It was not an admission of defeat, but rather, a strategic retreat. The reality was clear to both groups: the cost of direct confrontation was far too great. The war had not been without consequences. The Air Lords, even in what some considered a return to dominance, had paid a heavy price. They lost some of their most respected and influential members, individuals who had played key roles in organizing and sustaining their network. These were not just members, they were symbolic figures within the group, and their absence was deeply felt. And yet, while no formal agreement or peace treaty was ever announced between the two rival confraternities, there seemed to be a quiet understanding. It was as if both sides looked at the aftermath of what had just occurred and silently agreed that it was not worth repeating. No words were exchanged in public, no document signed, but an invisible line had been drawn: continuing the war would bring more damage than gain. The silence that followed wasn't just about fear, it was about wisdom. Open contest over territories, which had once fueled many of the earlier confrontations, began to fade. Shared spaces, hostels, classrooms, political platforms, were no longer claimed in the aggressive manner they once were. Members of both groups coexisted in the same areas with a tense but silent understanding. They had already seen how far things could go, and no one was eager to light the match again. In the years that followed, other confrontations would arise between the same two confraternities, smaller disputes, sometimes resulting in brief escalations. There were stories of clashes in different schools, and even within the University of Lagos, occasional tensions flared up. But none ever quite matched the scale, the intensity, or the lasting impact of that first major conflict. That particular war, the one that shook the university, remained in the minds of many as the most defining. It was the first open showdown between two growing forces, and it set the tone for everything that followed. While both sides would go on to win some battles and lose others, it was this early war that left the deepest scar. Those who were there during that period never forgot. It was more than just a rivalry, it was a shift in the spirit of the university. It reminded everyone that the pursuit of influence, when left unchecked, could consume not just the people involved, but the entire institution itself. The war may not be documented in official university archives, and the names of those affected may not be publicly acknowledged, but the legacy of that dark chapter continued to echo through the walls of the school. It became a silent warning for future generations. A reminder that peace, even if fragile, was far better than chaos. And that sometimes, the most powerful lesson is the one taught not by victory, but by loss.